Alright, I'm gonna have to kind of go through these in slightly more in-depth than I have been usually, and I do apologize for that. But already, it's getting on in the hours, and I need to get going. So, we're gonna go ahead and push through as many of these as I can before I basically run out of time tonight. Have you ever played Arcanum of Steamworks and Magica Obscura? And if so, what did you think of the dichotomy between magic and technology, and which side did you choose, if either? I thought that was a good game. It was a game that felt like it should have been a lot better than it was, if it makes any sense. You know, it was a game that had amazing potential, had an amazing setting, and then didn't really go anywhere with it. It was nonetheless a good game, and it's one I recommend for anybody who's looking for a good PC game. I loved the dichotomy. I loved the whole concept of, you know, magic changing physics versus technology enforcing physics, and the two actually clashing with one another like that. I liked that, and it's something I've used myself in a modified format, obviously, in some of my D&D campaigns. I shouldn't say that, my D20 campaigns, because it's not D&D. I haven't run D&D since, you know, I was like 15. But as far as which side I chose technology. It seemed more interesting to me given the setting and given the modern age that we were walking into. It seemed like the way to go in order to enforce, I don't even know how to put it, enforce a way to improve society rather than keeping it shackled, if that makes any sense. Next question. Do you think the upcoming war with the Thalmor counts as a civil war in terms of the Stormcloaks? I actually have no idea what this person is actually asking. I guess the automatic answer would be no, but I feel like I'm missing a point here. I don't understand why that would be a civil war. The Thalmor are the enemy, and so it wouldn't be a civil war so much as it would be a war. It would be us versus them, and possibly several other members of the Dominion who have segregated from it and separated from it and wish to join us, or indeed simply attack them. You know, enemy of my friend, enemy of my enemy. You know, that kind of thing. So who knows? I don't know. Next question. What is a good... do you have a list of good story-based RPGs on the PS2 or the PS3? Now, unfortunately, I do. It's on a flash drive, which is in another room. I actually wrote down a list, so I'm afraid that's going to have to wait. I apologize. I'll get back to that one. What do you think of the upcoming patch 103 for Diablo 3? I think it is a perfect fix for a lot of the game problems. I do like the patch. I think that the nerf, a lot of people have been complaining about the haste nerf, the attack speed nerf. I personally think it was getting a little bit ridiculous, and bringing it down is a necessary feature. What I think they should have done is either not brought it down as much or buffed something else in exchange. However, that almost guaranteed will be fixed in a future patch, so I'm not too worried about it. I do think a lot of the patch fixes they did were helpful and necessary and added to the game, made it a better game overall. Next question. Hang on. Do you think doing something evil to an evil character should be considered evil, good, paragon, or renegade? Evil. The person is still doing evil, and they're still doing it with evil intent. Whether they're doing it to someone who is evil or not is more or less irrelevant, if you follow what I'm saying. Especially since it is possible and indeed probable that the first evil person who's doing the evil to the second evil person is ignorant of the fact that the second evil person is evil, or indeed considers it irrelevant. You know, you're in my way is usually a sufficient reason that would still make it evil, in my opinion. Do you think spears should be added to Skyrim? Yes. What kind of spears should be added? Oh, I could name several specific types, but suffice it to say, I think that spears should be added in general. I would love, even if it was just spear, you know, like a lance or something like that. That would be awesome. I would like that. I would also really like pikes to be added. Something like a halberd, I believe, is what I'm thinking of. Would also be really cool, but, you know, I'd love to see that in Skyrim. What is your take on how they're doing the new Strike Force missions in the new Call of Duty? It looks pretty fun, in all honesty. It's something I've been passing along with a friend of mine, my only friend of my various friends who actually enjoys FPS games like that, and he and I have both been considering picking it up, basically specifically to enjoy the new Strike Force missions. So, you know, it looks interesting. The only catch is going to be how it's presented, and if it's going to cost anything extra. I don't remember if they've said anything about that yet or not, so I'm just going to have to assume. Have you ever mentioned Vindictus, which is a free-to-play MMO for anyone who doesn't know, and its revolutionary combat and implementation of physics? I don't believe I have, but Vindictus, as I was discussing in my last video, certain free-to-play games do actually have something to add to the genre in general and to the market, as I've said before, and I do think there are several that are worth time and money and interest. It's just, not for me because I play, pay MMOs. I hate to call them real MMOs because that's being disingenuous. I just, it is a different category. An MMO with a subscription is a very different type of creature than an MMO with just FTP. And I prefer this type. However, Vindictus is one I would put on the list of recommended if you are interested in a free-to-play MMO. It does take some getting used to, and the story is incredibly threadbare. But the combat is interesting, the physics is fascinating, and I do like the way they implemented it. So, I do give it a bit of a thumbs up there. Next question. This is actually a clarification because the gentleman was talking about me mentioning MechWarrior Online. He was correct. I was thinking about another game. I am actually in the MechWarrior Online beta, but unfortunately the NDA is still in effect, so I can't actually say anything about it. Um, have you ever played a game and just shot someone or something similar knowing you will reload the save after? Yes, I have. There's a specific game I tend to do this a very lot in, and that would be Fallout. Anything, Fallout 3, just to use an example here. I tended to be really good at that reverse pickpocketing thing. Well, one time I was in the water purification plant before it actually becomes the water purification plant, the Jefferson Memorial. And there's a guy there who's just like, "Oh, you're just the big guy on campus, and we're all just supposed to bow and scrape, and you just come in and change all our lives." And he's just being a total name to you the entire time, and it was very frustrating, very aggravating, especially since I was playing, my usual I'm trying to be the Mario character, help everyone, help everything. And so finally I just started laughing. I was like, okay, hang on, save. And I reverse pickpocketed a nuka grenade or whatever it's called into his pants, and so he does the animation, oh my god, and then the nuke went off, which of course killed me too because I was standing 1 foot from him. And that was extremely gratifying, I'll admit, because he had it coming. And then, of course, I reloaded and just walked on. Actually, I think I shot him in the face with a shotgun next. But anyways, let's just move on. My favorite RTS of all time is Seven Kingdoms, which is yours. I have no idea how to quantify which my favorite RTS is because I have played so many, and a lot of them are excellent or art. Like Warcraft 3, for example. StarCraft 2 is another excellent example, and there are certain RTSs that hold a special place in my heart, such as Red Alert, Red Alert 2, and Red Alert 3. All three of them for Command & Conquers are amazing at games, in my opinion. And of course, Total Annihilation, as much as many people have complained about that game, including a friend of mine who liked the game, I love Total Annihilation. I wish that the new the Supreme Commander series was more Total Annihilation and less whatever it is. I felt disappointed by the game series, ironically enough, because I love Total Annihilation. It was awesome. And so, but of all these lists, if I was really put down, again, if I was held at gunpoint and they were like, oh, what's your favorite RTS? I would probably go ahead and say Warcraft 3, and probably go ahead and give it to StarCraft 2 next, and then Warcraft 2 after that, and then probably the Red Alert series as an aggregate. If I had to pick, I'd go ahead and say Red Alert 2 as my favorite, then Red Alert 1, then Red Alert 3. But that's getting into really fine details, and it also kind of depends on my mood at the time. For example, Red Alert 1 was a very down-to-earth, serious... I shouldn't even say that. It was a lot more realistic tone. It felt a lot more like the original Command & Conquer than, say, Red Alert 2, which had a completely different tone to it, which was still awesome in its own right. I still love that opening movie, the whole thing, they're throwing everything they got. You're throwing everything you got at us. We Romanovs have our legacy to consider. I love that game. But it's a completely different tone, and so comparing the two really does kind of come down to a coin flip of what my mood is at the time. So I can't really give a solid answer here. And I'm talking too much. Moving on, what are your thoughts on games with large amounts of exposition and or action sequences restricted to cutscenes rather than actual gameplay? And the example he gives is Metal Gear Solid 4. Games like this, FF13 would be another good example of this, by the way. Games like this can work. They are effectively an interactive movie, and the problem there is it hinges fully on the story, the movie aspect. How good is the voice acting? How good is the writing? How good is the directing? How good are the camera angles? How good is the graphics? How good is the animation? You know, all of these things. How good are the sound effects? How good is the music? All of these things have to be top notch to make up for the fact that you're basically playing an interactive movie rather than playing a game. So it can be handled well, and I would actually use Metal Gear Solid 4 as an example of that being done well, and Final Fantasy 13. However, if I was asked honestly, I would list other FFs, you know, like FF6, for example, or FF7, or FF9, or FF4, or FF5, as better examples of doing that, and indeed, Metal Gear Solid 3 I do prefer a lot over Metal Gear Solid 4, so I think it comes down to a matter of opinion and preference, but I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just more often bad because it's easier to fail at that than it is to fail at, you know, having a decent gameplay underneath a bad story. A couple of Mass Effect 3 or Mass Effect questions here. Someone asked regarding the Asari and how they got what's coming to them. What part was I referring to? The Asari, in very brief summary, had this whole "we're on top of everyone, we are the we're the stewards of the galaxy. We're the ancient ones." Very much had a Vorlon feel to it, actually, if I'm honest about it. And the fact that they got all of that because they had been specifically selected by the Protheans in order to be the assistants of the next cycle basically means they cheated. Now, them cheating didn't bother me. Them taking the attitude of being superior to everyone's did bother me, and that's why I say that they sort of had what they were coming to them. However, I will have to qualify that as saying that no one deserves what happened to the Asari as a whole, and I was more or less speaking, humorously. I was not trying to be serious. I do not think they deserve to have their world crushed, as did happen. So, moving on here. How do you feel about BioWare taking the time to give Jessica Chobot a character model and not giving Tali one? Do you know why they created Diana Allers instead of using Emily Wong? I want to talk about this one very briefly because one of the things I wanted to talk about, I never actually got around to back in my Mass Effect videos, was the fact that one of the reasons I was so psyched about the game right up till its release was everything that I had seen looked awesome. Nothing had given me any indication that the game was going to be what it was. Subpar and with a terrible ending. With some awesome moments. I will always make that addendum. You know, the Tachanka mission is what I love to use as just the poster child there. But one of the things that really threw me was there was this whole thing on Twitter. They made up a Twitter feed, I think it was Twitter, with regards to Emily Wong posting what was happening as the invasion was occurring. And not only was that a brilliant and correct and well done marketing scheme, as opposed to most marketing schemes which are terrible and involve someone not using their brain, it was very well done, it was very excellent, and it actually gave me chills the way it was going. And the way it finally ended, I love this. I would have loved to use this. If I was making Mass Effect 3 Arshan Gaia's edition, Emily Wong's whole thing at the beginning there, I would have actually rendered out in an in-game cutscene. No interaction whatsoever, just showing you what's going on with her. Actually, maybe some interaction. Have you play as her for a bit? Because, no weapons, no ability to attack. That would actually be really cool now that I think about it. But let's just move on. Having that whole scene being the actual intro to the game, the very first thing you see, and it ended with Emily Wong taking the hover car and ramming a Reaper with it, and saying, "You want to see how humans die at ramming speed." And I loved that. I loved the way she said it. I loved the way I envisioned it. And I loved the way that immediately after the Twitter cutoff feed ended, it was brilliant. It was beautiful. It really set the tone for what the game should have been, and it was magnificent. And that would be why they didn't use Emily Wong, because that was a correct decision. Killing off Emily Wong in that manner was awesome, was very well done. Nothing against the character at all, quite the contrary. That was a good death. That was an amazing death, and I wish they had done that in-game rather than in the Twitter thing, but still, it worked. Now then, why did they give Jessica whoever a character model? That just comes down to the wrong kind of marketing, as opposed to giving Tali one, which would have been the right kind of marketing. And that's all I have to say about that. It was the wrong kind of marketing. It was the wrong kind of someone walking in and saying, "Oh, we'll do this to pander to this, or to enhance our audience in order to increase our overall audience to this. And I don't know if many of you know this, but there's only two ways that works. Either you succeed and you successfully give all of your expanded audience what they want, or the other 99% of the time you fail and give your entire expanded audience, all of them, not what you want. These guys want this and they didn't get it. These guys didn't want this and they didn't get it. Moving on. How many playthroughs did you give Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3? To date, I have replayed through Mass Effect 1 3 times. I've replayed through Mass Effect 2 5 times, and and when I say replayed, I should say played. I have played Mass Effect 1, I've played Mass Effect 2. I have played Mass Effect 3 1 and about a quarter times. I was trying to do another playthrough. I failed. I gave up. If I want to see the Tuchanka mission again, I have a save there, and that's the only part of that game I really enjoyed. I do, of course, still have a save right before the Cerberus mission in order to play the DLC in a bit, but hey, you know, we'll talk about that later. Ignoring all the other Mass Effect 2 characters for the beginning, do you feel that Samara's whole appearance in Mass Effect 3 was mishandled? Not necessarily. It wasn't good, but it did feel a little bit less than it should have been, and by a little bit I mean a lot. A lot of the side characters, Jack is another excellent example, I felt should have been more in Mass Effect 3 rather than a side mission, one cutscene, and then the last cutscene right towards the end, and that was it. I felt Samara needed more, and I felt a lot of them needed more than that. Jacob would be another excellent example there. The whole mission at the monastery felt like it was building up to a big clash between the love for her daughter and her code. Do you think there should have been the option to break her code partially for the good of her daughter, but also for the good of herself? No, I actually don't, but this is purely personal preference. As much as I am in favor of choice, I am usually in favor of choice that makes sense and flows naturally, and Samara's code had bound her for centuries. And that's not the kind of thing you break of a moment. It's not the kind of thing that just shatters or fractures or anything like that. It's the kind of thing you make a slow, gradual decision to break away from, and that's not something Samara had been doing in Mass Effect 2. It is something that, in fact, she had been adhering to, was staying with the code no matter what, and I think it would have been completely out of character if she did. Now, that being said, I do wish that scene had been expanded on greatly, as I mentioned, and I wish we had seen more of that, and I wish that, you know, there could have been more done there. However, to say something positive about that scene, I loved the fact that Samara was willing to shoot herself in order to adhere to her code and save her daughter. That made perfect sense, fit the character beautifully, and I thought was an excellent character moment for her and really said volumes about Samara as an individual. So I did like that. So I will give it its props where props are due. Did you ever contemplate Morinth's comment on Ardat Yakshi being the genetic destiny for the Asari, keeping in mind Samara's comment on how the Ardat Yakshi are sterile? Yes, I have thought about that, because I think that was being done on purpose. The term genetic destiny was used a lot in Mass Effect 2 as one of those arc words that was recurring, along with the whole dark energy thing, and humans are unique and special, and genetic diversity while I'm on the subject. But that word, I think she was using that rather intentionally, and it was being done from an artistic perspective, from a storyline perspective, from a writing perspective, to get across the point of how someone laying down a writ law of this is the genetic destiny of this species tends to be wrong, which is what the Reapers were doing, which is what several individuals were doing. And Mordin himself talks about, you know, how wrong he believes that is, and I agree with him. You know, that is not something that should happen. You should not say this has a genetic destiny. You should say this is the general path where we're going in, and we're going to do what we can do as we go, because, you know, screw fate, basically. And so I think her saying that was a really nice touch, because it really helped emphasize in an extremely subtle way why she was the villain in that case, and why that mindset was probably wrong. And so I thought that was awesome. If you could go back throughout the entirety of the Mass Effect trilogy, are there any aspects that you would change, not counting the ending? Ah, dang, that would have been an easy one. Well, I changed the ending. No, okay. The Mass Effect trilogy as a whole was a pretty good series, and by that I mean it was amazing, it was incredible, and then it was alright. Naturally, I would change a lot of Mass Effect 3. In fact, I would basically redo Mass Effect 3 more or less from the ground up. The amount of things I would not change is so small that as to be mentioned as like footnotes, as bullet points. So I guess that's my secondary answer. Of course, that also still feels like cheating. Would I change anything in Mass Effect 1 and 2 is what I feel like is being asked here. And ultimately, no, I don't think I would. I think Mass Effect 1 could use a overhaul in terms of graphics and engine. You know, a proper remake, as I call it. And I think Mass Effect 2 could stand to be back on Steam. There you go. Wait, that's it. I want Mass Effect 1 and 2 to be back on Steam, unless they are on Steam right now. I guess I could check. But, because I know a lot of games were pulled off of Steam to Origins, and then they were put back, and then they were pulled again. I have no idea what those guys are up to, but I got nothing. Ultimately, really would not change much about Mass Effect 1 or 2. I think they were excellent games. So let's just move on. Next question. When is Mass Effect 3 Archie and Gaia Edition going to be released? The exact moment I gain the power of the queue is when that's going to happen. And I have to say that because winning the lottery, for example, as I've mentioned several times, is not sufficient to do that scale of thing. You know, I could not make my own game if I won the lottery. I could live happily and take care of my family and friends for the rest of their lives, but the amount of money required to do a game in modern times is simply... I would have to make something less. I would have to settle, and I wouldn't want to do that. So, same goes for this. You know, if I was to be granted the power of the queue, I could be like, all right, guys, we're gonna fix all this, and we're gonna do it right now because I can halt time while we work on this. Okay, and then in 4 days, rather than the DLC coming out, what comes out is Mass Effect 3 Archie and Gaia Edition. Not that anybody would have in, like, you know, 4,000 people in the entire world would have any idea what that means, but it would be awesome for them, I'm sure. I hope, anyways. That is the idea, is to make an awesome game. Speaking of which, do you think they gave Mordin a good death? Yes, like I said, that's one of the very, very few things I would not change. Now, I'm talking about the Paragon ending here. I think him being shot by Renegade Shepard had its own problems. Could be argued as being acceptable under certain circumstances, but let's not talk about that. His death, his sacrifice, really, and his death scene were tear-inducing. They actually did make me cry. And that whole scene was basically perfectly done, and I would change nothing about it. Now, this is response to, if I mentioned in my last Q&A, or one of my last videos, you know, if I could just sit down with Casey Hudson and team and ask what actually happened, you know, and what the actual problem was, and no marketing, no publishing, no spinning the issue, just tell me the real truth. The question being asked here is, if you were told that real truth by Casey Hudson and etc., would you actually keep your mouth shut about it? And there's a real-life karma question here, I think, because the truth is very important, even in minor things. So I think I would as fairly and balanced as I could let people what was really going on behind the scenes. Now, the truth of the matter here is I take my promises very seriously, and when I say that, I mean I've never broken a promise in my life. And you may believe me if you choose, or if you might disbelieve me if you choose, but that is actually the truth. I take my promises very seriously, and so if Casey Hudson and crew said you have to promise not to share any of this information, then I wouldn't. I would like to, and I would preface it with, if I was like, here's the real truth, and I'd like to share it, and they said, well, we'll tell you the real truth if you don't share it, then I would not share it, because I'm not going to break my word. I'm not going to lie to them. It's not how that works. And so, I suppose that's my answer. It depends on what they said. Now, this question had a certain tone to it. Did you feel like the romance between Joker and EDI in Mass Effect 3 was ridiculous, out of place, and an insult to their characters? Now, this is probably going to sound not like what you want to hear. I do apologize for that. But no, actually, I thought it was logical. I thought it was well broadcasted. It was something that started in Mass Effect 2, made perfect sense, and made perfect sense for the characters. One of the things I talked about, if you'll forgive me for just a moment, over in Star Trek Voyager, is that the Doctor and Seven should have gotten together as far as a couple, because it made the most sense within the setting and within the characters. The Doctor is a hologram. Seven is a recovering former Borg. If either one of these characters were to get with anyone else, anybody else, even if they understood and tolerated and respected them for what they were and how they were different, the fact that they were still having in mind, you are a Borg, but I respect you, you are a hologram, but it doesn't matter to me, that first step is still there. The hologram And the former Borg would not have that first step. It would never enter either of their minds. They would simply see the other person. And so that made a great deal of sense to me, and that's where I think that arc should have gone personally, was because the only way the Doctor could have really had a long, at least with the confines of the time, because circumstances do change, it could have really had a fulfilling and meaningful and open and not, it's like it's almost like a disability. Yes, I love you despite your disability, but that sentence is being said, I love you despite your disability. This is still part of the sentence. With the Doctor in Seven, it would be, I love you, not, I love you even though you're a hologram, or I love you even though you're a former Borg, because it wouldn't occur to either of them. Same exact situation, in my opinion, with Joker and Edie. I love you even though you're crippled and have a crippling medical condition. I love you even though you're a true AI in an artificial body. No. Just I love you, and I love you. And it made perfect sense, and it flowed, and it was awkward, and you could help them out, and I loved helping them out, and I was actually really happy that they got together, because I think those two people deserved some happiness in their existences, especially after what Edie went through back in Mass Effect 1, if I might be honest. So, ultimately, I was actually really pleased with that romance, and I think they, if anything, that they should have either done more on it or expanded more on it, or if I'm being completely frank, they should have leveled it out more, as in, because it kind of went like this, because Mass Effect 3 always had this feeling, the rushed feeling. If they had stretched it out more, just growing slowly, gradually, into that, I thought that would have been better, but let's move on. Oh, let's scroll down to, God, I'm not even halfway through here. I don't know if this has been asked yet or not, but I'll ask anyways. What is the worst video game you've ever played? That actually has been asked. I'm sorry. I'm answering a duplicate question, but I'll answer it really quick anyways. The Barbie game I mentioned earlier, the Barbie game on the NES. Worst game ever, bar none. Next question. Does a game's soundtrack count in whether or not a game is art? Yes, absolutely. That it is, there is no... Hang on just a second here. I feel like I've answered these. Maybe I'm just having a really weird sense of deja vu. Because I do tend to mentally answer these in my head before. I'm going to go ahead and pretend I didn't answer these and just say I'm getting a really weird sense of deja vu. So I apologize for my weird freakout moment there. Yes, I do think a game's soundtrack is absolutely pivotal to whether or not a game is art. I do think the music is just as important as the graphics, and the aesthetics of the graphics is just as important as the writing, is just important as the story, is just important as the characters and character development. I think a soundtrack is a crucial and indeed integral part of a game, and will have a huge impact on whether or not a game is considered good, or great, or excellent, or indeed in the art category for me. And every single game that I consider in the art category has fantastic, amazing music, usually music that moves me, that makes me feel. So... Now, this gentleman was regarding his Civilization 5 comment. He was having a situation, which was not the one I was talking about, where after so many turns they get disconnected, and when they try to reload, it doesn't let everyone back into the game. I did have, or rather, my friends and I did have a similar issue. I wanted to share how it worked for us. What would happen is every so often, it wouldn't disconnect. It would go back to the loading screen right here, and we would see that for a bit as it reload the turn we just happened, and then occasionally someone would get dropped from that. But as long as we didn't move, as long as because we recognized this pattern earlier on, as long as we didn't do anything, the other person could then just rejoin, because we used the Steam version, just invite to game, and they rejoin back in their spot, and we're good, no issues there. Also, I have not noticed that happening lately, but I don't know if that was actually fixed or not, or if it's just random chance on that, so I don't have more information. I'm hopeful, if nothing else, that that won't be a problem soon, since that expansion comes out very soon now. And I've already purchased it. Do you believe that even with the next-gen consoles, they will still make games that use 110% of the console's power, and then port it to the PC and use 25% of the current PC's power? Or do you see only a returning... Do you not only see a returning golden age of video games, as I've discussed before, but a return of an age where developers do the most they can for PCs, like the Crysis series did, and then work hard to port it to the console? I think the latter is getting more and more common, or rather, more and more probable, and it will become more and more common as time goes on. I do think that that is much more likely to be the way things are going to go in the future, especially since console games are a fairly large market and are getting pretty much getting up there in processing power, and so putting forth the effort into making a good port is something that people are getting more and more interested in, especially since the overall percentile of households in general across the world basically, but especially in the three big markets, which I guess is the world. Now that I think about it, the 3/3 of the world. Um, the percentage of those households that have multiple consoles and multiple games is increasing as time goes on, and so I do think that is something that's going to start happening. Or maybe I'm just being hopeful. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being idealistic. This is kind of a long one. The character of Gygas from Mother 1 and 2 was the actual character. What did I think about how it grew from how the grandparents of Ninten raised him? Why did he give up the children? Why did he give up when the children used the lullaby that Ninten's grandma sung to him? Was Gygas really evil, or was he corrupted to be evil? And what would make him decide to become the monster he is in Earthbound? And is he technically dead? And if not, why didn't he come back? And do you think he actually felt love or loved? I think that Gygas, or Gigu as he was called back in Mother 1, was a entity that did not function in the same way we did. Not to say that that's a bad thing or indeed a good thing. It's simply different, alien. And I think that that concept of that unconditional love that Ninten's grandmother showed him, or it, I'm going to call him a him, is what screwed Gygas up so much, and what he could not understand, could not function properly. And so when the song is sung, he was reminded so strongly of all those feelings that he didn't really understand. He didn't really have a place for it in his mind or in his logic, and so he just kind of broke down, and that's why, that happened in Mother 1. That being said, I believe that instability and that disconnect is what caused all of the problems that led Gygas to basically dissolve as an entity, not just as an individual, as a person, but as an entity, into what is essentially a mass of incoherence, not evil, simply chaos. There is a difference, and I believe Gygas was essentially it was chaos given form, if you could say that, in Earthbound, in Mother 2, or rather. And so I think that is the reality of that. And when you prayed during one of the most awesome final boss fights in video game history, and everyone prayed, and everyone prayed, and the waves of all that feeling that originally caused that deconstruction of his existence, and that disconnect between its mind and its heart, caused it to self-destruct, basically. I think Gygas is not dead. I think Gygas is annihilated. I think Gygas doesn't exist anymore. Was wiped clean from from reality's slate. And no, I don't think he'd come back, obviously, consequently. As far as whether he actually did feel love or loved, I don't believe he felt love, but I do believe he felt loved. And I do believe, as I said, that that was the primary problem. Now, of course, I've theory crafted those games significantly and had my own little plot theory as what was going on, which was thrown out the window completely, of course, when Mother 3 came out. Which is fine, I don't mind, it was just, But I have thought about this at length, in case you're wondering why I'm going into detail here. Could you describe the world of Warhammer 40k to me? I hear a lot about it, but I have no idea what it is. What is it? Why is it so brutal and dark and the racist enemies? I couldn't possibly give Warhammer 40k a proper summary in such an executive fashion, so I'm just going to give, like, bullet points, okay? Everywhere is war. Everywhere is death. The chaos and the warp corrupt everything. Everything is trying to kill you. And there is no such thing, with very few exceptions, as innovation. That's important because all of Warhammer 40k is actually in a technological dark age. Everything they're doing, everything they're using, is the equipment and the technology from previous eras that they have learned how to function and to repair, but not to make. And so they are in a technological dark age in societal terms, and that is a lot of reason why the entirety of the setting has been stagnant for so long. And finally, Diolks. I think that's the last thing I'm going to say about that, is Diolks, because they deserve their own little commentary. what is your favorite era of WoW and why? And when it refers to this, it refers to which of the expansions. All four of them, indeed five of them to some extent, have appealed to me for their different reasons. I'm going to go ahead and say Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King for different reasons. Burning Crusade was the beginning of what I call the golden age of WoW. You know, WoW Vanilla was a great game. It was. But it was only a great game. The only things that really stood out in WoW Vanilla were the truly excellent raids and a few tidbits here and there. BC brought story back to World of Warcraft, really expanded how quests worked, really made quests a lot more enjoyable to do. You know, a lot of people I know still have that mentality that quests are something you do to level or to get money or whatever. Somewhere along the line, for me, that changed to the point where quests were something I did for fun, because I enjoyed questing. And BC is when that really started. And that trend has been continuing ever since. You know, as someone was just asking me, why are you in Thousand Needles? I'm questing. Oh, there's new high-level quests there? No, I'm doing the low-level quests. Why? Because they're fun. Because I like them. Because I enjoy the story. Because this is great. This is an awesome game I'm playing. And they just looked at me weird, you know? And I am weird, I admit it. But BC was the beginning of that. BC was the beginning of all the change. And, of course, BC had some of the really excellent raids, you know. The original Noxoramus I still hold as the pinnacle of truly difficult raiding, and difficult in the right way, you know, not artificially difficult. Noxoramus is proper difficulty, and I don't actually blame them for never going back to that, to be completely honest with you, because so few people, statistically speaking, actually got to enjoy Noxoramus, which is a shame, because Noxoramus was a work of art, but part of the art was the fact that it was so beautifully, brilliantly, insanely difficult, you know. But BC toned it down a little bit, but still had some of the awesomeness involved. My favorite raid to date in BC is actually the Black Temple. I loved going through the Black Temple. I loved raiding that place. You know, I have so many fond memories of going through there. Hyjal I had nothing against, of course, but, you know, it kind of got to the point where we were just grinding that one. But Temple never got old for me. However, all of this is kind of lead up, and I do apologize. My real answer is Wrath. Wrath of the Lich King finally was like, okay, we're going to really start pushing cutscenes and layering, because that's when layering entered WoW. And we're going to use all these new additional tools at our disposal to really make the game and the quest and the instance and the raids a more cinematic and more enjoyable experience, and it was awesome. And Wrath was also kind of my heyday as far as raiding goes. I mean, yes, I was there in the original Noxoramus. Yes, I was one of the first people on my server in order to down Ragnaros back when he was the only raid. You know, yes, all that stuff happened. However, in Wrath, we were the second, actually, team to get down, you know, Heroic Lich King 25 and all that fun stuff. And there were so many moments of pure awesome that we pulled off in Wrath. I couldn't even begin to list them all, you know. But there were many of them. I'm going to list one of them if I may, because this is probably my favorite of all of them. We had been trying for several weeks to get the Champion of Ulduar achievement. Me and a friend of mine and 8 people that we had culled from several guilds in order to make this 10-man group. For those of you who don't know, the way you get it was you go through Ulduar and you don't die on any of the boss fights. Now, it worked a little bit different from the Undying, but let's not get into semantics and details, okay? That's the summary. Get through Ulduar, don't die on any of the bosses. Now, that was this was also when Ulduar was new, by the way, and that was a little harder to do than it sounded, to put it mildly. To not die at all, especially given some of the mechanics of those fights, was brutal. And we had been failing, and we got to the point where we were playing Monday night. I really want to get this point across, okay? Blizzard patches their servers Tuesday, and usually back at this point in time, the servers would go down at about 3 a.m. our time here. And so we were playing Monday night in Ulduar, literally our last chance ever to get this achievement, to get this title, because in the patch that was going in a few hours, it was being removed from the game. And we did it. And it was awesome. And it was such a crowning moment of awesome and achievement that because there were so many moments when we got within like this close of failing, because only one person has to die for the whole group to fail it. And we came so close so many times to failing that, and we did it, and it was awesome. I still remember the sheer exultation of that moment of pulling that off within like, and then we're like, yes, yes, and we just all stood in a Dalaran with our new titles on. Yeah, as the server's like, server coming down in 15 minutes, we're like, yes, we beat you. So that would be one of the many reasons why Wrath would be my favorite era of World of Warcraft. Are you looking forward to The Dark Knight Rises and its ending of Chris Nolan's trilogy? Tangentially, yes. We'll see what happens. I have some hesitation, but I am overall looking forward to it. Do you think Bane will be the great villain for Batman, both physically, intellectually, emotionally, and theatrically, like he should be? Yes, I do. Mainly because of the way they're presenting him. As anybody who reads the comics know, Bane is actually an interesting and engaging villain, and a very intelligent villain, and so hopefully they're going to pull that across as well. Do you think that Nolan may do what no one else has done before and kill off Batman, and if so, do you feel this would be right and work in the film's favor? Potentially, yes. Batman has been killed on a few occasions before in the books, usually in alternate storybooks, and it has been done properly twice, to my knowledge. Whether or not they'll do it in the movies, I think it is more likely that he will pretend his death and then continue his life, not as Batman anymore. But I could be wrong, and they could actually kill him off. I don't know. We'll see what happens. And finally, what do you have to say about Warner Brothers already planning a Batman reboot again for 2015 at the earliest? It is their right to do that, of course, and as I've said before, a proper reboot can be good, and as I've said before, rehashing an idea works if you do it right, and if you make a good product out of it. So automatically I'm disinclined to like the idea. However, if they pull it off, props to them. And here's hoping. What time am I up to here? Oh my goodness. We'll go and do a couple more before I cut this one off, because I'm not even halfway through still. How do you feel about the Wii U? I've already talked about this at length, so I'm just going to summarize. Not interested. Nothing I've seen so far has made me like it. Most of what I've seen has made me dislike it. And as I've said before, any console, including the PC if you want to count that, must exist for me on its game library, and so far I have seen 0 games on the Wii U that look interesting. Will you be purchasing it? Depends on if games come out for it. And if not, what would nudge you to buy one? Again, if the game library finally gets to the point where it is good enough, I will go ahead and buy the Wii U, but I'm not really thinking about it right now. How do you feel about Zelda Skyward Sword? I am playing through it actively, about once a week actually, with my friends, or my family actually, and we are very much close to the end, and I'll do a proper review then, so I'm not going to spoil anything. As far as what do you think about comparing it to other games such as Twilight Princess, I think well, you know what? I'm not going to get into it. That will wait till the review. I will do a review of Skyward Sword one way or another, because that's, by God, it's like one of the 3 that I'm going to do one way or another. So, yes, I'll review it and I'll get to that later. Have you seen Square Enix's Final Fantasy Agnes Philosophy tech demo, and what are your thoughts on it? It was interesting to a certain degree. It was a nice tech demo, I'll agree. As far as whether or not they'll actually do anything with it, or indeed do anything good with it, who knows? I found myself looking at the Quake situation again. Quake and the Quake games have never exactly been fantastic games, or the Dooms for that matter. But there have always been fantastic engines, and other great games have been made on them. So, we'll see, but it depends on what you do with it, not what you're wielding. Next question. Would you mind sharing your opinion on the aesthetics of Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, most especially Ganondorf's appearance? I admit I was one of those people who immediately discounted Wind Waker when I first saw it. That was a mistake. I'm just going to say it flat out. That was being prejudiced and in the wrong way. I should have given that game the chance then. When I finally got around to playing Wind Waker, it was amazing. It was an incredible game, and it had another one of those truly epic final boss moments like Earthbound has that just really resonated with me, and I loved it. And the aesthetics of the situation were things that I really did have to get used to, especially Link himself. However, Ganondorf specifically never bothered me. In fact, I actually really thought Ganondorf looked amazing. The flowing robe look and the large man thing. He was not fat. He was very muscular, and he was very there's a term for that, and I can't actually think of that. And using the dual swords as well, very aesthetically interesting. I very much thought they went a good direction with that. Speaking of the differences between good and evil in Fallout 3, I would like to know what you thought about the final decision in the Pit DLC, as well as what you picked. I thought that was an awesome decision. I'm only going to answer this briefly because I already talked about this in Fallout 3, in my Fallout 3 review. But in summary, I thought it was awesome that it was a genuine moral dilemma and that both sides were wrong, and so both sides theoretically could be right. I went ahead and sided with the guy whose name I can't think of right now, the gentleman who was in charge of the pit, the former member of the Brotherhood of Steel. And the reason for doing so, in summary, was because I believed him a lot more than I believed the other guy, who, in my opinion, was more out for himself than to try and help others. Next question. Speaking of differences, oops, I'm sorry, that's the one I was just on. What is your opinion of the series Elfen Lied? No idea how to pronounce that. Being considered art, even though the majority of the show revolves around animal abuse and murder and has quite a bit of tasteful nudity in it. That is one of those animes I've tried out, as indeed I've tried out many, many. It did not catch me at all. I could see why certain people would see it as art. It is fairly well presented, but the subject matter was completely disinteresting to me and frankly somewhat unpleasant, to put it nicely, at several times. So I have nothing against other people qualifying it as art. I would not put it, for example, in my art category. I put it somewhere down here, but not my thing, in other words. However, I have no problem with other people stating that, as indeed, personal taste does have its own place, after all. Given the success in terms of sales and fan growth of Fallout 3 and New Vegas, do you think a high-def remake of Fallout 1 and 2 would be possible in the future? And, okay, so, I've mentioned this before. In fact, I think I said this in my previous review, about how much I genuinely would like to see several of the older games remade with newer engines, proper remakes as I call them, like as I keep going back to this, Final Fantasy Origins and Final Fantasy IV on the DS. These are the examples of proper remakes in my opinion. I would love to see Fallout 1 and 2 remade with a modern engine, with modern UI, with modern conveniences put into the game. That would be awesome. I would buy that new. I would buy that brand new, right up there with like Baldur's Gate 2 and Planescape Torment, That would be a game that would be an automatic buy for me. And I would love to see that. As far as engines or graphics quality, the gentleman mentioned StarCraft 2 or Diablo 3. Both would work really well. Because obviously you can't go to the first-person or third-person perspective of Fallout 3 and New Vegas. But you could pull off, I think, an increase in graphics quality to, say, Diablo 3, for example, and I think that would work. Have you heard about the KOTOR 1 restored content mod, and if so, will you play it when it's released and do a short review on it? I don't know if I'll do a review on it because of the reason I'm not sure I'll do any reviews at this point, other than the 3, which I insist on doing. But yes, I have heard about the mod, of course, and I very much approve of it, and I'm all on board of that, and I would like to play it when it comes out. And by that I mean I will play it when it comes out, assuming I can find the time to do so. And I recommend anybody who is into KOTOR at all to look into that. It's the restored content mod, and I can't give you a link here, obviously, but just glance on Google for it. Can you please upload all of your previous Q&As to the podcast format if it's not too much of a hassle? I could do that. In fact, I probably will go ahead and do that at some point before before circumstances change. Already, I've uploaded quite a few. There's like 7 or 8 videos up there right now. I just checked today to make sure they were actually up and functioning, and there are several there. So I will continue to do that in the future. It just takes a tremendous amount of time to convert the video files, upload the video files, convert them again, and then upsync them to the iTunes store. Next question. Do you think this will really... Raise eyebrow. Hang on, I'm not sure what this question is asking. The question is, do you think this will really mean anything for the final product when it's done? The planning and all for the sequel would have started long, long back, and it's too late for any kind of major change to be done anyway. So this way... Oh, this is talking about the Mass Effect 3 ending DLC. Is this a way of showing goodwill, or is this a way of faking goodwill? As I've said many times, it is my opinion that this is faking goodwill, and that while there are certainly individuals who are not to blame and who probably feel very bad about the whole circumstance, as an aggregate, this is a situation that I think is not, it is something that is being faked as a marketing scam. Do you think that the individuals behind the Mass Effect series have enough incentive to give the fans of the original what they want? They know what we want, and if they wanted to, they could actually give us all that. Does this not make more fiscal sense as well to the more greedy individuals within EA? Are they so stupid that they really believe that their tyranny continue without consequences? Don't they see a future for their company? Now, this is the great unfortunate truth. Companies like EA continue to exist because companies like EA continue to make money. They do not make as much money as they could. Theoretically, if they were really to put the time and the budget into their games. I have to say theoretically because you have to understand how this works from a financial perspective. Let's say this line here, as represented by this pencil, is how much money your game is going to cost to make. And let's say this paper towel, I work with what I got, is how much money you have made gross, okay? So starting the line, let me pull up the camera here so I can see where the edge is. Here we go. Okay, so starting over here, this is 0, right? And this is, some imaginary number that does number, because the actual numbers here don't matter. So let's say you spend about this much money, okay? Nice and average, right in the middle. And because it's an average game, it does reasonably well, and you make this much money, okay? Gross. So the space in between here is your net profit, if you follow what I'm saying here. Now, let's say you go ahead and put a lot of time and money and effort into this, and really, put all that into here. Where this is going to land may be back here still, if you follow what I'm saying. Or it may be here. Or it may be here. This is a complete gamble. This is what I've talked about this before with EA. This is a risk because it could be anywhere on this scale and you may or may not make the kind of money on it. By contrast, if you make a game over here, put hardly any time and budget into it, you are guaranteed to make at least this much money. And as you'll notice, if you can see here, the difference in the net profit there is not that significantly smaller from over here. You're making a lot less money, but because it costs so much less to put into it, you're still making money. And that is why EA is still in business, and that is why EA still makes money. In a nutshell. So, the people who are in charge of the money decisions, aka the people who are in charge, are the ones who are going to be making decisions like that, and that's what EA does and always has done for the last 22 years, I believe, at this point. And it's worked for them for 22 years. So, I sincerely doubt we're going to see any change anytime soon, especially not over something as relatively small as Mass Effect 3. And I hate to say that, but Mass Effect 3 is not the first game on the chopping block for EA, nor is BioWare. Next question here. Regarding the matter of Hope being irritatingly whiny, of course you don't have to like him. I don't like him either. But I felt FF13's characters list was a huge contrast to, say, FF7, where each character in FF7's cast was not only larger, but almost all the characters were more memorable and had more depth into them. What did you feel about... Oh, and somehow the entire game didn't feel right to me, except for Snow and Lightning. The other characters were very average. So I guess you won't be doing an FF13 review anytime soon. I was planning on doing an FF review, as in Final Fantasy 1 through 13, all of them. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do that at this point, but I would. It is still on the list, so to speak. That being said, I agree that one of the reasons, and indeed I would actually say the primary reason, why I think FF13 is a lower quality FF than most of the others, while still a good game, but lower quality, is because the characterization is so much worse. There were some truly good characters in FF13. 3 of them that I can think of right off the top of my head. But so many of the others just kind of felt like they were there, or a little bit too cliched, or felt like they were more caricatures than characters, that kind of thing. And of course, Hope just made me want to slug him every time I saw him on the screen. By contrast, as you mentioned, in FF7, all of the characters, even Cait Sith, or rather Reeve, were well developed, were interesting, had character growth, had moments, to them, had dedication of the story to them. They were all more relevant. And indeed, I actually like to use FF6 as my personal favorite example there. Even Umaro was awesome in his own way. He didn't have a lot of character growth, or indeed any. He didn't have a lot of lines, really. But Umaro was a particular brand of awesome, and so was Gogo. But those two, even if you were to go down to it, those two are the only exceptions. If we were to eject Gogo and Umaro from the cast list, Final Fantasy VI had nothing but absolutely extraordinary, amazing, well-developed, well-written, well fleshed out, and well-growing characters. And that is what some of the more modern FFs tend to lack, where you'll have 3 or 4 characters that are that, but the rest of the cast are not. FF12 is another example of here. I thought Ash, Bosch and Balthier, well developed, well thought out, well characterized. Fraun had her moments. The other ones, you know, but that's just my opinion. Question. I think I heard you mention you'd like to see Cairn come back in your Warcraft 3 review. Is this a possibility in your opinion, and how would you do it? Yes, I absolutely think it's a possibility. Not the least of which being he is a shaman, and reincarnate has been an ability of theirs since Warcraft 3. But even ignoring something as basic and simple as that, it would not be difficult to explain in lore how Cairn can come back. People being resurrected in lore, you know, not just in gameplay mechanics, but in lore is something that happens. It is usually relatively rare, but for an exceptional individual like that, I could see that. Now, how I personally would love to see that is Thrall would be the individual I would want to actually bring his spirit back to his body and resurrect him. And then I would love to see Thrall and Cairn team up with the player to go take down Garrosh and beat that whiny little fleck into oblivion. I don't like Garrosh, by the way, if that's not obvious. Next question. What do you think of the Siberia games, and have you played them? I have not played them to my regret. I have heard of them. They do look interesting. As usual, I can't comment much else. So I guess I'll just go to the next question. What is the most mentally challenging game you've ever played? And have you ever played a game that you enjoyed but couldn't fully complete? The answer to the second question is easy. Yes, dozens. Because there are several games I have that I own that I've started playing and I have not finished playing right now. So... But as far as older times, or if that's a trend, no, that's a more recent thing having to do with time and real life and all that fun stuff. As far as most mentally challenging game, that is a very difficult question because, how do I put this? A lot of strategy games tend to really engage you when you get really into the hard stuff, when you really crank the difficulty up, when you really have to deal with, you know, everything at the same time, and you literally have to shift how you think, and you really have to be like that, you know. So that was extremely mentally taxing, which I liked. I enjoyed that. Puzzle games in general don't mentally engage me, as weird as that's going to sound. And that's not arrogance. That's actually quite the opposite. I am bad at puzzle games because here's what's happened. I'm playing this puzzle game, and I'll be looking at this puzzle, and I will either figure out the solution within about a second, just like that, or I'll stare at it like, and not get it. And so I tend to not play puzzle games that much. The exception to that is a game like Tetris, which I don't count as a puzzle game, but, you know, Tetris is different. Tetris is spatial recognition, which I'm very good at. Pardon me. Past that, I can't really think of any individual games that really challenge me mentally, unless we're talking about, well, how do I put that? Tabletop, I guess, is the way I'd put that, because I do, especially when I'm GMing, which is 98% of the time, I have to keep track of what is essentially a world, or at the very least a continent, and everything that's going on in it, and all the different cultural attitudes and beliefs and the species, and, you know, what happens within this society, what happens within the city, how is this city different from this city, you know, what species are accepted where, and what languages will get you where, and what kind of currency do these people accept and that people. There's an incredible amount of mental challenge and taxation in order to do that, and I love it. That's one of the reasons I enjoy GMing. But that's all I got for you, so I do apologize if that seems like a simple answer. What, in your opinion, would have to happen for Warhammer 40k to finally end the wars and have a new age of peace? There's several things that could make that happen, in my opinion. My favorite to date is the Emperor actually comes back in some fashion or another. And the Emperor, I always believed, while he was not exactly a good man, nevertheless did want to help, you know, did want to better, at the very least, the humans of the situation. And having him come back and just being like, okay, guys, stop. Because it would take the Emperor himself to do this. And that would be one way that could be accomplished. Another way would be unique circumstance. I don't know how better to explain that, but, you know, every now and again a cycle is broken just because one thing was different, and that set off a chain reaction. Final Fantasy X is a great example of that. You know, it would take something extraordinary in order for that cycle of war to be broken, and I don't actually think it's ever going to happen, but it would be wonderful if it did. And I know that probably sounds horrible, but let's move on. I have developed the mindset that character-driven stories are the way to go. If a story does not have characters in it that we, the players, care about, the story is not worth going through. What are your thoughts on this? I disagree personally, but I do actually see where you're coming from. Because all of the games, virtually all of the games I consider to be in the art category, the absolute best of the best, no really, are games that not only have, excellent music, excellent directing, decent gameplay, all these other things, but a great story which also has very much, it was very character focusing and a lot of character growth. I think that is arguably the single most important facet of a game's story. That being said, there are games that I do enjoy that don't have a lot of character growth. Just to name an example right off the top of my head here, Just Cause 2 is a game I enjoy a great deal that has zero character growth throughout the entire course of the game. Zero. None. And in fact, and I use that as an example specifically because Just Cause 2 does have a story to it. I do have to do this here because it's very threadbare. But there is a story there. It's just completely not character focused. It's basically an excuse plot, I believe is the term for that. However, an excuse plot, in my opinion, for me, can work as long as something else makes up for it. And as in Just Cause 2, the sheer gorgeousness of the game and the fun factor and the open-endedness and the gigantic sandbox and the many modes of travel and combat and movement and everything and exploration make up for the fact that there's none of that other things. However, I would also never rate Just Cause 2 in the art category. It's probably one of the best sandbox games I've ever played, but it's not art. And one of the major reasons why is because of what you said, of the lack of character growth. So that's my feelings on the matter. Let's see here. What is your oh, shoot. Actually, you know what? We're going to go ahead and stop this because I need to look this one up. And it's getting late, my goodness. So we're going to go ahead and stop here for now.